Hi, and welcome to this edition of Behind the Badge, your behind-the-scene look at what's going on with the Wichita Police Department. Well, today my guest is Lieutenant Scott Heimerman. Scott, thanks for being here. Scott is the lieutenant over the gang crimes unit and the felony assault unit, and so good to have you here and talking a little bit about gangs and what's going on in the city. So, with that, what's been going on? You guys keeping tabs on what's happening with the gangs around the city?
Gang violence this summer's been fairly active. However, we've been keeping track over the last several years on statistics, and honestly, this year's really no different than the last 6 have been as far as an average goes. So, although it's steady, it's nothing that's out of control at any given time.
Well, and that goes to there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. You guys have a strategic plan. Tell us a little bit about what the police department does in terms of kind of a comprehensive look at gang violence.
Essentially, it's a 3-prong approach on how we address gang violence in the city. There's education, which is one prong. There is the prevention aspect of it, and also the enforcement aspect of it. As far as the education aspect of it, we've been working aggressively, actively, if you will, with the state AG's office and developing online training courses that civilian aspects can access to learn about gangs, to become familiar with gangs, and also provide them with some prevention tools that they can be used or that they can use. That kind of goes into the prevention aspect of it too. We work with the Crime Commission, the local Crime Commission, in developing billboards that are placed throughout the city. The Crime Commission's also been actively involved in the task force with the AG's office in developing the training program as well. We have the tattoo removal program that also is spearheaded by the Wichita Crime Commission. As far as the enforcement aspect of it, on a daily basis, we receive information on gang members that have been arrested within the last 24-hour period, and we can reach out to those cases, grab them, and make sure they're prosecuted as aggressively as possible, whichever venue it may be, whether it's the federal prosecutor's office or the local DA's office.
Well, and not only that, but when you talk about the venue, you've been very involved, not only as a unit, but personally involved in working on some of the laws. Can you go into a little bit about what you guys have been doing to work with legislators to not only toughen the laws, but to make sure that they're up to date?
Sure. About a year ago, the state AG's office, the Attorney General, came down and actually went on a citywide or a statewide tour to kick off Gang-Free Kansas. Part of that was developing a task force, if you will, a committee, if you will, to look at the current gang statute to see if that needed to be improved upon. And also, one of our main goals was to develop a RICO bill, which was actually introduced in January of this year. Part of that aspect of it was I testified in both the Senate House and House subcommittees on that bill, and it did pass this year and actually became law on July 1st of this year. Again, that same committee is involved in developing training programs that can be used by civilian entities throughout any city within the state of Kansas.
And so that really gives law enforcement in particular kind of an extra tool with the RICO. You might explain to those that aren't familiar with RICO, what exactly does that allow you as the gang unit to do?
Essentially what that does is we can take and target the heads of these criminal organizations, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a criminal street gang. It could be a narcotics trafficking organization, or it could be a human trafficking organization, because the bill actually, or the law actually, addresses those 3 entities. And so we can target the heads of those organizations that are involved in racketeering activities and essentially chop the head of the snake off by stiffer penalties, harder sentences, and hopefully dismantle the organization.
Which was one of the early barriers to gang enforcement, was that there really wasn't any good way to go after them to get to the leadership, because a lot of times they weren't the ones that were carrying on all the small stuff.
That is correct.
So, well, I know that there's probably some people out there that might be a little bit concerned, especially parents of kids that are in that in-between years of, would my kid ever be labeled as a gang member? Can you kind of go in and give us some general ideas? How does someone become a gang member by police standards?
Well, and it's important to remember that the police department as a whole does not, we are not responsible for, well, I take that back. We don't set the criteria for one becoming labeled as a gang member. It's statutory. It's Kansas Statute 2163-13. And essentially there are 10 pieces of criteria, and that if an individual meets 3 of those bits of criteria, they can be labeled as a gang member. Or simply by admitting to a law enforcement entity that they are in fact a gang member or a member of a gang. But it's also important to remember, especially if you're a parent of an individual or a child that may be labeled as a gang member, that's not a lifetime sentence to be labeled as a gang member. Once documented as a criminal street gang member, that documentation is only good for 3 years. If that individual doesn't become involved or hasn't become involved in any other gang activity in that 3-year time period, they simply fall off the active criminal street gang list.
So now, how do you guys keep track of all this? Is there a method by which you guys use?
We document individuals as criminal street gang members in a database. It's our own intelligence gathering database. Essentially, we have 11 detectives that are assigned to the gang felony assault unit, but we also have 4 officers that are assigned to the gang intelligence unit. And on a yearly basis, we audit that database to make sure that if an individual's on there that shouldn't be on there, they're removed. Or if an individual needs to be placed on the database or in the database, that becomes available as well.
Well, one of the things that has happened in recent weeks is you guys have made it an effort to publicize some of your, and you call it the top 10 gang members with the public. What's the theory behind that?
Well, part of what makes a gang member or gang successful is the underlying, their activities that are underlying. They get away with this, and sometimes they operate in a anonymous fashion. And so essentially what we decided to do was, hey, we know you're a gang member, you're one of our most active gang members, and you have a felony warrant. You're causing us problems, you're causing the city of Wichita problems, and you're making quality of life for our citizens a problem. And so by publicizing the name and the face of this individual, we're essentially taking that anonymity away from him and saying, this is a gang member. He's got a felony warrant. We're asking for your help, the public, to try and get this guy in custody.
Well, and you touched upon it when you were talking about the 3-prong approach. Can you kind of develop a little bit? This isn't just about going after gang members, but you are passionate also about keeping kids from going into gangs to begin with. And so can you talk a little bit about efforts that the gang unit takes to really work in the community, to partner with different agencies to see that these kids get the support so they don't have to rely on it?
Well, we've gone out this year and recently too with the Wichita Ministerial League and reached out to them in an efforts to have those church members contacted in a sense to try and touch or reach out to that aspect of the community, because honestly, church leaders have probably more of an influence on these kids than we ever will. Mm-hmm. And so we use that as an aspect. But when our officers or our gang intelligence officers are out there in the street, it's not just about putting somebody in handcuffs and placing them in jail. We're also out there reaching out to these kids and trying to make some sort of contact with them on a positive note and try and get them steered in the right direction. It doesn't always work, but we have to try something.
Well, and what's the youngest gang member that you've seen?
I think probably around 13.
And that's awfully young, and I think the impact a lot of people fear. Can you talk a little bit about in terms of, and you said this, This is a community problem. It's not just one particular area of town. It's a community-wide problem. What would you say to those people that say, well, what can I do to help out? What can I do to address?
Well, for one thing, the Wichita Police Department cannot handle this on their own. We absolutely have to have community involvement in this. And like I said, church groups need to get involved. If you're in your block and you see in your neighborhood some activity you just know is not right, we need to know about that. You reach out to either your beat coordinator through community policing or your neighborhood beat cop. Call a station. You can call Crime Stoppers. You can call 911. You can call the gang unit directly. There are several different avenues that you can make an impact in your little slice of the world there, and in a positive fashion. We have had some cases where houses have been shot up in a drive-by shooting, and nobody on the block has called 911. We didn't find out about it till later on, several hours later on, and it's hard to effectively enforce those types of crimes when we don't find out about it for hours. In fact, it's almost impossible to. So without the community involvement in something like that, in this problem as a whole, I mean, it's going to be tough. We can't do it on our own for sure.
Well, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to meet with us, Scott. And we hope that you do take to heart some of the things that we've talked about, that you need to be active in and be reporting things as you see them, and get involved in your neighborhood, and maybe you can make a difference in one of these young people's lives. So thanks again, Scott, for being here, and we'll see you next time on the next edition of Behind the Badge.